Welcome. This is Katumi.
Thank you, Katumi.
I am pleased to be able to speak in this format also. However, I would like to open the floor to questions that you may have.
I presented a program last week to a number of company presidents, and the topic was one that it's important, but I think it's a challenge for people in business, especially leaders, and may also be a challenge for others. And that is the power of vulnerability, or vulnerability-based trust. And really what it talks about is that we are more genuine when we're more authentic, that we connect with people better, we have fewer misunderstandings, communication and teamwork improve, problem solving improves. Many, many benefits, but it's very difficult, especially when we've been working for years under a lot of stress, and people are afraid to let their guard down. They're afraid to be genuine. And I wondered if you would speak to that. Any advice or insights would be helpful.
The operative word that you used is afraid, a function of fear, and fear creates separateness. Mm. That separateness grows to lack of trust. Us and them, adversaries. Even if you are on the same team, there is that competition, the adversarial relationship that has been nurtured throughout your society. Who is the best? Mm. Who contributed the most? Who is the leader? Who is the winner?
And it's exacerbated by a sense of scarcity or fear of scarcity. That if someone wins, someone else must lose.
Yes. And all the statements about coming in second.
Yes.
That type of thinking loses the sense that there is always someone better and someone less than in a particular task, ability, skill. And that gives rise to all the statements about how temporary it is to be king of the hill.
Mm, yes.
All of this comes together in business, especially because this is identity, and it is money, financial security, and other stressors that you may have at home. But the most important is how it affects identity. A person would introduce themselves and say, this is who I am, as what they do for their employment.
Yes.
It's very subtle, but unfortunately, it creates such a strong hold on the psyche. The media builds on this. Television, movies, different entertainments, etc., that says if you show any vulnerability, of which trust would be one, then you open yourself up to betrayal.
True.
And the other person will win the prize. And you will be told, sucker. Mm-hmm. You knew this was a competition.
Yes, we're certainly seeing some reality TV shows that are doing that to extreme.
And it is seen also in the workplace. And this contributes to the downfall of the business.
I have seen that.
When you cannot trust or communicate well with those in your own corporation, then it becomes adversarial and it falls.
Information is withheld. People would rather see an initiative fail rather than see an adversary get credit for it. Well, of course, conflict. You know, I've seen a lot of the prices that companies pay for that.
And it is not as pronounced as it is in government.
Well, I'm sure of that.
You see it at its extreme in governments all over the world. So we already know this is detrimental. It doesn't work, but it continues.
Because unless everyone does it, then you will be making yourself more vulnerable in some ways. Or at least that's the fear.
That is the fear. You do not have that fear.
No, I didn't have it when it would have helped me in my early years in business.
But you still made a name for yourself.
Yes.
Because you stood in your integrity.
Yes.
And that standing in integrity that congruence translates as power. So the person who may be your boss or your boss's boss who's ranting and raving is seen as less than to you because you are standing there in integrity. What was the word again?
Congruence.
I was asking because of the C. Those C words are tough for me. You were standing there in integrity, in your congruence, and in your power.
You know, I once had, it was actually my boss's boss, say to me, one day I will find the price of your soul. That's the kind of company I worked for. And I laughed and I said, there is no price. But when I left that company, he told me with great feeling how much respect he had always had for me, way beyond my title. And this is what I want people to know. For example, if there's no power in someone telling you that you're less than perfect, if you already know it and you accept it and it's fine, you know that you're doing the best you can and you're continuing to try and get better. But we somehow feel that we have to mask our shortcomings or portray ourselves as different from what we are. And that becomes a tremendous burden to carry.
The threat is always there, though. That is why people don't want to hear it. The threat of, you know, there are 100 people out there waiting for this job. So if you show any weakness, you could be replaced.
Yes.
And that is why so many also insulate themselves with others doing the job.
I would be more inclined to say, you know, I think I'm probably the best that you're going to find, at least at the salary, but let's go out and check. Let's run an ad and see what we could find. Because often, you can't do it in a flippant way, But I think when you address those kinds of manipulative comments, they dissolve. They generally just fall apart.
There are companies who encourage their employees, who pay appropriately, and who enjoy great profit through times of recession.
Yes. I know some of those companies.
It is interesting that this paradigm is still a minority. It's still a rarity.
Yes.
So how do we change perception so that this type of business can be accepted? The first place is with children and our schools and the way our schools are taught. Our children are taught in schools. Everything is ranked.
Yes.
And it is taught in a more linear fashion and tested, and then the child is given an identity. They do not, in general, consider that if a child excels in a particular area, let's say art, or recognizing patterns, that is a unique talent and intelligence for themselves, for that child.
Yes.
And it has value in the world. Perhaps even more value than one that can recite facts on a test. When a child is able to look inside and say, this is what I like to do, this is what I'm very good at doing, this is what I would like to really excel in, and have it be appreciated, when that happens, there will be a shift in all the organizations that follow.
I would say also, first of all, it's an excellent point. We have a long way to go to realize it probably, but I would think that when we stop having artificial ways of determining people's value, or let's say narrow ways, we may have less bullying. Because I think bullying comes from lack of self-esteem. People trying to either shore up their own insecurities or dominate those that they see as weak or lesser. I mean, that may be another subject altogether, but it would seem to me that it would bring about more societal health.
Yes. And you've seen bullies in corporations.
Yes, I have.
The idea of bullies is new in as far as taking a stand against that behavior. The way you stated it is very good, because a person is not a bully. Their behaviors are inappropriate in a way that we call those types of behaviors bullying.
Yes, separating the behavior from identity is the key to promoting change or to initiating change.
Some like that title. I'm the big guy. I'm the bully.
Gives them the illusion
Of power.
Of power.
If we can disconnect from those judgments and address the issues that cause the behavior, that is the much more sane and effective way of handling it.
It's an excellent point, because when I started doing that in my work and business is when I started having success in conflict resolution.
Unfortunately, so many punish the bullies. They punish them in a way that the punisher is
Becomes a bully.
the bully.
I know.
And it teaches that the person needs to be a bigger, badder bully, to be the top of the heap.
And they generally then turn around and do the same thing to people who are weaker than they.
Yes. And again, you see this in governments.
Yes.
I repeat that statement because societies are made up of individuals.
Oh yeah.
You see it in an individual, you see it reflected in a society.
And I think we feel impotent to change what is when we see it in the larger context. How do we change a corporation? How do we change a government, a society? Not so easy. But if each of us changes ourselves and in our circle of influence, then it could happen.
Yes. There has already been a talk about community.
Yes.
The statement, think globally, act locally, is very powerful. What you want to see in the world, you become. And you influence those around you, and you reach out to those around you.
You know, what comes to my mind is, even in a small way, instead of continually complaining or judging what is happening as the world is going to hell in a handbasket, that can perpetuate it too. And if you do nothing more but look for those counterexamples of where there are people doing good work and where things are working out well, and people are not selfish or engaging in negative behaviors, and they exist too. You have said, when a tragedy occurs, instead of merely focusing on the tragedy, look for the helpers and be inspired by those who come together in a different way to help when times are difficult. And I think that can help to bring about the change too.
Yes, and to consider that oftentimes it is a very small minority that creates the dysfunction.
Yes, I can see that. But they're noisy, so they sound like they're more than they are.
And the media.
Yes.
That is what sells. People are attached to their fears. And that also comes from, besides a disconnection with spirit, but it comes from that us and them thinking.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it becomes generalized.
You know, there are some inspired thinkers of our day. And Byron Katie comes to mind, and Eckhart Tolle comes to mind. who say, if you love what is, you will be filled with such joy and peace and serenity. It is counterintuitive, but in my exposure to people like that, who live that way, I think there's something to it. I haven't been able to do it yet.
Perhaps not quite so existentially, but to have the sense of self, connection with your divine essence, and have that power. That in itself can change things. Because then those that are crying out can be heard. They may be noisy, but they're not heard, are they?
True, true.
And sometimes when their statements are made clearly of what they want or what their situation is, action can be taken. Unfortunately, still, we have the us and them and the scarcity thinking, and that perpetuates and fuels these feelings of isolation, rebellion, and retribution.
And I also think that when people are afraid that they're not going to be heard or their needs are not going to be respected, they tend to have emotional intensity around it that is out of proportion to this, to this situation. And their delivery of their message gets in the way of the words that you were saying, as you were talking about, that they would not even be heard.
And what happens, some can clearly state, but as that happens, as you stated, then the message of what they want or need gets lost. And all they can speak or demonstrate is a fanatic anger.
Yes.
And it becomes, now you will all pay.
I've seen that when people in business fear a loss of position, a loss of prestige, or of money or security. The desperation and the terror leads them into behaviors that they would not otherwise ever engage in.
Again, we can look at governments.
Well, we're certainly seeing it in this country with the polarity between the two main parties, and this wrestling for power that is totally overshadowing the growing serious needs of our society, of our environment, the world. It seems to be coming to the point where we're going to pay a price for this if we don't get serious about what's important. What's the way out of this? Get to me. Where do we go with this?